course I expressed my opinions, yeah. Because I was producing the records, and so was he, and so was who else?
David Gilmour rarely speaks in absolutes. He is measured, polite, almost disarmingly calm. But beneath that restraint sits a lifetime of strong opinions. Over the years, he has quietly dismissed, criticized, or rejected a handful of artists outright, not out of ego, but conviction. Tonight, we look at the 6 musicians David Gilmour could never stand behind. Number 1, Eric Clapton. On the surface, Eric Clapton and David Gilmour shared a lineage. British blues, global reverence, technical command. But Gilmour slowly drifted away from what Clapton represented. Not the playing, but the posture. Tradition, when treated as destination rather than starting point, felt limiting to Gilmour. Respect remained, but belief quietly faded. For Gilmour, music was never about preservation. It was about motion, about allowing uncertainty to remain present inside a performance. Clapton's work increasingly felt settled, anchored in reverence for form rather than curiosity about where sound could still travel. Gilmour believed the past should inform music, not enclose it. When structure becomes sanctuary, discovery quietly ends. There was also a deeper difference in how each man understood expression. Clapton's playing often aimed for clarity and resolution, delivering a complete statement. Gilmour gravitated toward ambiguity, notes that bent and hovered, solos that felt unresolved by design. He once explained his philosophy simply, saying, "I'm not interested in showing how fast I can play, only in how it feels." As Clapton's reputation solidified into that of a traditionalist, Gilmour grew increasingly wary of guitar hero culture. He watched how technical mastery could become its own reward, how applause could replace emotional risk. To Gilmour, music needed to feel slightly unstable, like something might slip if you leaned too hard on certainty. Without that tension, sound became decorative rather than communicative. This skepticism extended beyond Clapton himself. Gilmour questioned the broader impulse to canonize technique. He resisted the idea that emotional truth lived only inside inherited forms. In reflecting on musicianship more broadly, he once remarked that playing something perfectly doesn't necessarily mean you're saying anything. What ultimately separated the two was intention. Clapton honored tradition by standing inside it. Gilmour honored it by pushing against its edges. One sought continuity, the other atmosphere. Neither approach was invalid, but they were incompatible in the long run. For Gilmour, the guitar was not a monument. It was a question still being asked, again and again. In the end, Gilmour did not reject Eric Clapton's talent. He rejected the comfort that surrounded it. And for an artist who believed music should always risk vulnerability, comfort was the one thing he could never trust. Number 2, Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page built his legacy on scale, mythology, and excess. David Gilmour watched from a point de vue, distance. Where Page leaned into spectacle, Gilmour leaned into restraint. He never denied Page's ambition, but he questioned its necessity. For Gilmour, music did not need to overwhelm to endure. Grandeur without emotional clarity felt like noise dressed as importance. Page approached the guitar like an architect of legend. Songs stretched outward, stacked with symbolism, volume, and mystique. For many listeners, that enormity was the appeal. But Gilmour remained skeptical. He believed emotion should feel intimate, even when the sound was large. When atmosphere became theatrical, something human risked getting lost inside it. What troubled Gilmour was not Page's talent, but the gravitational pull of excess. Layers multiplied, solos lengthened, meaning became implied rather than felt. Gilmour valued space, the way a single sustained note could carry more weight than an avalanche of sound. He once reflected on his own approach, saying, "I like space. I like to let things breathe." Page's mythology also stood in quiet contrast to Gilmour's sensibility. Where Page cultivated mystery, Gilmour favored transparency. He believed music should reveal feeling, not conceal it behind narrative or symbolism. When the spectacle demanded attention first, emotion became secondary. For Gilmour, that inversion mattered deeply and shaped how he listened. This difference extended into how each artist treated power. Page's music often arrived with force, daring the listener to submit to its scale. Gilmour preferred invitation over domination. He believed intensity could be slow, fragile, even uncertain. Reflecting on heavy-handedness in music more broadly, Gilmour once remarked that loud does not automatically mean powerful. Gilmour did not reject ambition itself. He rejected ambition that crowded out vulnerability. He believed that when everything is emphasized, nothing truly lands. Music, in his view, should leave room for the listener to enter, not push them back with force or demand submission through scale alone. In the end, Jimmy Page represented a path Gilmour consciously avoided, one built on scale, myth, and domination. Gilmour chose another, one shaped by restraint, clarity, and emotional risk. Grandeur could impress, but only honesty, he believed, could endure long after the sound faded. Number 3. Roger Waters. This was not a clash of personalities at first, but of philosophies. Roger Waters sought control, narrative, and authorship. David Gilmour valued ambiguity, atmosphere, and openness. Over time, those differences hardened. What remained was not anger, but refusal. Two visions of music moving in opposite directions, no longer willing to share the same space. In the early years, those differences created tension that still produced remarkable work. Waters brought concepts, structure, and thematic certainty. Gilmour brought texture, melody, and emotional space. The balance worked, until it did not. As Waters' grip on authorship tightened, Gilmour felt increasingly boxed in. Music, to him, was becoming something to execute rather than explore. Gilmour believed songs should leave room for interpretation, for listeners to find themselves inside the sound. Waters preferred precision, messages sharpened, narratives closed in. Gilmour once reflected on that shift by saying, "I don't want to tell people what to think. I want them to feel something and decide for themselves." That difference, subtle at first, slowly became unbridgeable. As the years passed, collaboration turned into negotiation. Trust eroded. Decisions became battles over control rather than shared instinct. Gilmour resisted the idea that one voice should dominate completely. He believed music thrived on uncertainty, on the tension between ideas rather than the enforcement of a single vision. Waters, increasingly certain of his authorship, moved in the opposite direction, convinced clarity required authority. What made the split inevitable was not ego alone, but incompatible definitions of purpose. Waters treated music as a vehicle for statement. Gilmour treated it as an emotional environment. One sought clarity, the other resonance. Reflecting later on the breakdown, Gilmour observed that When everything is explained, there's no space left for mystery. After the separation, that philosophical divide became even clearer. Gilmour's work leaned further into atmosphere and restraint. Waters' work doubled down on narrative and confrontation. Each proved consistent to their own values, creatively and ideologically, without compromise or retreat. In the end, Roger Waters represented a boundary Gilmour would not cross again. Not because of resentment, but principle. Music, for Gilmour, had to remain open-ended. And once that openness disappeared, so did the partnership, permanently and without reconciliation. Number 4. Sex Pistols. When the Sex Pistols erupted, David Gilmour recognized the shockwave immediately. Punk's arrival mattered. Its anger mattered. What unsettled him was how quickly provocation replaced musicianship entirely. The Pistols symbolized a version of rebellion that rejected nuance outright. For Gilmour, destruction without emotional depth felt less like honesty and more like refusal. Gilmour understood why the moment resonated. Punk tore through complacency with urgency that progressive rock had lost. It rejected indulgence and demanded attention. In that sense, the Sex Pistols were effective. But Gilmour listened beyond the impact. What concerned him was how shock itself became the point. Music, stripped of craft and atmosphere, risked becoming a gesture rather than language. To Gilmour, rebellion was only meaningful when it revealed something human beneath the noise. Anger alone was not enough. He believed emotion needed shape, even when it was raw. Without that shaping, confrontation flattened into repetition. Reflecting on minimalism more broadly, Gilmour once remarked, "If you remove things, you have to replace them with something that matters." Without that exchange, subtraction felt empty. The Sex Pistols also represented a rejection of patience, something Gilmour valued deeply. Songs arrived like declarations, leaving little room for ambiguity or listener interpretation. For Gilmour, music was not a manifesto. It was an environment. When everything was stated outright, there was nowhere left for feeling to linger. What troubled him further was how quickly punk hardened into posture. Anti-skill became identity. Limitation became proof. Bands that once rejected authority began enforcing new rules just as rigid. Gilmour saw rebellion turning inward, policing itself. He believed true disruption required curiosity, not slogans. When refusal replaced exploration, music stopped asking questions. Later, reflecting on movements that confuse rejection with depth, Gilmour observed that cutting things down does not mean cutting feeling out. That distinction mattered deeply to him. Simplicity was only powerful when it clarified emotion. Otherwise, it masked absence.
Of the place we lived when we were young, in a world of magnets and miracles.
Gilmour never denied the Sex Pistols their cultural impact. He questioned their musical endurance. Shock fades. Atmosphere remains. For him, rebellion without introspection was temporary by nature. In the end, the Sex Pistols represented a warning rather than an enemy. Provocation can ignite change, but it cannot sustain meaning on its own. And, for David Gilmour, music that refuses depth eventually refuses itself. Number 5. Kiss. Kiss represented everything Gilmour distrusted about spectacle overtaking substance. The volume, the costumes, the theatrics. It all pointed outward. He never questioned their success, only their priorities. When image became the message, music became secondary. For Gilmour, Performance should serve feeling, not overpower it. Excess without vulnerability left him unmoved. Gilmour understood the power of presentation. He had spent decades on large stages, surrounded by light, sound, and expectation. But he believed spectacle should amplify emotion, not replace it. With Kiss, the balance felt reversed. The visual statement arrived before the music had a chance to speak. Sound became accompaniment rather than foundation. What unsettled him most was how identity was constructed. Makeup, characters, pyrotechnics, all meticulously designed. Gilmour believed music should reveal the person behind it, not mask them. When performance became armor, intimacy disappeared. Reflecting on showmanship more broadly, he once remarked, "I want to hear who someone is, not what they're wearing." Kiss also represented a shift toward dominance rather than dialogue. Songs were built to overwhelm, to command attention instantly. Gilmour preferred invitation. He believed music worked best when it drew listeners inward, rewarding patience and attention. When everything was designed to be immediate, nothing lingered long enough to deepen. There was also a philosophical distance in how success was measured. Kiss embraced branding as part of the art itself. Merchandising, personas, and scale became inseparable from the music. Gilmour never denied the effectiveness of that strategy, but he questioned its cost. When identity becomes a product, sincerity risks dilution. For him, restraint was not limitation, it was protection. Later, reflecting on performance-driven music, Gilmour observed that if the show is louder than the feeling, something has gone wrong. That imbalance defined his discomfort. Sound should carry the weight. Everything else should serve it.
When high you fly, smiles you'll give and tears you'll cry.
Gilmour did not dismiss theatricality outright. He dismissed theatricality without emotional consequence. Drama could enhance music, but only when it revealed something vulnerable beneath it. Without that vulnerability, spectacle became noise. In the end, Kiss symbolized a path Gilmour never wanted to follow, one where attention replaced connection, where volume replaced nuance. Success was undeniable, but for Gilmour, endurance was built differently. Feeling had to come first. Everything else was decoration. Number 6. Phil Collins. Phil Collins came to embody a shift Gilmour quietly resisted. The move toward polished accessibility. Songs engineered for mass appeal. Reinvention driven by visibility rather than necessity. Gilmour never denied Collins's skill, but he questioned the direction. When instinct gives way to approval, authenticity thins. That distance was where Gilmour stepped away. Gilmour watched this shift unfold gradually across the music landscape. Production became cleaner, edges softened, emotion was streamlined for immediate recognition. None of that was inherently wrong to him. What unsettled him was the intention behind it. Music began to feel designed rather than discovered, shaped by expectation instead of curiosity. For Gilmour, that distinction mattered deeply. He believed evolution should arrive organically, not as a response to popularity. Collins's success represented a broader movement toward accessibility as a goal in itself. Songs became more declarative, more polished, more efficient. Gilmour preferred ambiguity. He trusted listeners to sit with uncertainty rather than be guided toward resolution. Reflecting on this difference, he once remarked, "I don't think music needs to explain itself to everyone." What Gilmour resisted was not melody or clarity, but predictability. When songs announced their intentions too clearly, they lost space for interpretation. Atmosphere gave way to statement. Feeling was replaced by reassurance. Gilmour believed music should leave room for doubt, even discomfort. That friction was where emotion lived. There was also a difference in how success was absorbed. Collins embraced visibility and connection with a mass audience. Gilmour remained wary of shaping work around reception. He believed approval was a byproduct, not a compass. When reaction began to guide creation, the work risked hollowing out. As Gilmour once put it, you have to follow what feels right, not what seems to work. This distance did not come from dismissal or disdain. It came from incompatibility. Gilmour valued patience. He valued music that unfolded slowly, that trusted silence and texture as much as melody. Polished immediacy felt final to him, closed rather than open. In the end, Phil Collins symbolized a turning point Gilmour chose not to follow. Not because the path lacked success, but because it lacked uncertainty. For Gilmour, music had to remain a search, not a solution. And once that search ended, so did his interest in the direction it pointed. David Gilmour's rejections were never loud, and they were never casual. They came from a place of clarity about what music meant to him and what it could not become. Across these 6 examples, the pattern is unmistakable. He resisted spectacle without substance, certainty without mystery, and success that arrived at the cost of vulnerability. What Gilmour protected was not a genre or an era, but a principle. Music had to breathe. It had to risk uncertainty. It had to remain human, even when it was large, confrontational, or popular. When sound became armor, branding, or instruction, he stepped away without apology. Because legacy is not shaped by agreement. It is shaped by refusal, by knowing where the line is and honoring it. Which of these choices surprised you most? And where do you think Gilmour drew his hardest boundary? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe if you value stories that listen beneath the surface rather than the noise.